All right, YouTube, it's Monday morning. This is Detroit's HPTV coming at you with another video. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about all of the violence over the 4th of July weekend, which is typical, which has become the usual for the holiday in Detroit, Chicago, Midwest, most Democratic ran cities. We know that when the 4th of July comes and people is celebrating, we know that the violence is going to go through the roof every summer like clockwork. You can count on it. But what we're going to talk about today, we're going to really talk about Detroit and Highland Park. You know, I do a lot of politics nationwide and globally, but we're going to talk about where I'm from because I love this city. And I've been in this city almost 60 years. And there was a time in this city to where this was the most richest, thriving city for Black Americans. Everybody, uncles and fathers, worked in the plants. They was conservative. They went to church on Sundays. They had family picnics. Around 4 o'clock, you could see the men coming home from the plants, pulling up at a certain time. Ford had created a pay wage and built up communities for the actual workers at those factories. But I'm gonna tell you what LBJ did. LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, he made a statement. He said, if you can take the poorest white American and convince him that no matter what, he's better than a Black American, then you can rob him while you oppress the Black Americans. You can make the white Americans think that they can't get ahead if they poor because of the minorities. And then at the same time, you squeeze the minorities and make them jump through hoops. So when the city was striving and you had Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, where you had Black barbershops, Black owned businesses, somehow they built a big freeway that went straight through it and displaced all those people, the Chrysler Freeway. Then they started building projects and stacking people on top of people. Then they started closing the factories on the inner city. Then they started redlining to where the same white man that worked on the assembly line next to my father could move out of the community into a better neighborhood, but we couldn't go because of redlining. So we were stuck, even though the wages was enough to move. Now, the Democrats have already always played the race game. The more they race bait you, the less you pay attention to what's really going on because you got somebody to blame other than your duly elected officials. And it gets deep because in this city, you have so many churches, so many mosques, and so many temples, and so much religion. How can such a religious place be so deadly and be so dangerous? Have you ever asked yourself that? How come there's drug houses and liquor stores right down the street and across the street from the church, and people go in there and act as if they don't see the homeless and the bums? I'm not going to call them bums. The people who don't have any place to live sleeping on church steps. The reason for that is if you don't belong to a certain church, that church will not support you. The church could be right in your community and right in your neighborhood. It could be literally across the street from you. But if you're not going in there contributing your 10% tithe into the collection plate, that whole area will become decimated while the church becomes a mega church, draining the funds and the energy and the spirit out of the community. Have you ever noticed that with all these so called black organizations. There's many of them in Detroit. You got the NAACP with Wendell Anthony. You got Little Rock Baptist Church with Jim Holly. You got the mosques and the temples. Have you noticed they can never come together to do something for the masses of people? Never. Because at the end of the day, the church, the temples, and the mosques has been infiltrated by capitalism. It's all about money. It's not about the people. So the people suffer and the people are perishing due to violence. Before I continue my commentary, I want to show you what happened over the weekend. And this is just one instance. This is just one thing. And then I'm going to show you something else. This is for fair use under the 1976 Copyright Act for education and commentary and the First Amendment. Check out what happened over 4th of July weekend.
No one in custody so far for a mass shooting at a block party on Detroit's east side. It left 2 people dead and 19 others injured. It all unfolded early this morning around 2:30 in the area of Reno Street and Rossini Drive. That's on Detroit's east side, not too far from 8 Mile and Gratiot.
We want to get you up to speed on what we know so far. The victims range in age from 17 to 28 years old. The 2 people who were killed are in their early 20s, and the search is on for the shooter. Victor Williams spent the day talking to neighbors and community leaders. Victor, people no doubt are fed up with the violence.
Yeah, that's right, Will and Pam. You know, it's just so sad that you had lives lost in this situation. People who thought they were going to have a good time and then never returned home. Neighbors, along with city leaders, are saying that none of this should have ever happened.
And we was out here just trying to have a good time, partying. And initially, we thought maybe it was fireworks, but then, I saw the panic in everyone, and we instantly knew what was going on.
Hours later, and people are still trying to process how 2 people ended up being killed, along with 19 others shot during a block party on Detroit's east side. The victims are all between the ages of 18 and 28. The continuous gunfire erupting suddenly at 2:25 in the morning was enough to frighten Cliff Dykes, who lives only a few doors down.
We was on the porch listening to music and heard all the noise and screaming and shooting. So me and the wife, we just went up in the crib and went to bed. Woke up this morning, they were still down there.
What led to the shooting is unclear. City Councilman Scott Benson is shocked that it happened in his district.
It's tragic, and I'm shaken. We cannot have this level of violence in our neighborhoods.
Benson.
Now, see, when he says that, that's disingenuous. He's not shocked. He's from Detroit. He know the drill. This is not no new phenomenon. This is every summer. Every summer. So for him to say that he's shocked, how? When you look at the crime that doesn't even go reported in the city of Detroit, less known watching the news. When you watch the Detroit news, it's traumatizing what's going on with the youth. And one of the things that's really the problem, single parent homes, destruction of the nuclear family, which automatically destroy community ties. You look at the young men, they don't respect the older men. You know why they don't respect the older men? Because the older men are scared of the youth. They scared of the very things that they created and produced. Think about that. These men are scared of their children, and their children don't respect them, and their mothers can't control them. And at the same time, the architects of this chaos with their liberalism is saying defund the police. You got a whole city like Highland Park that doesn't even have a high school. How can a city not even have a high school? So we're talking about a city that is underserved except for downtown because of the religious leaders and the government officials. See, most religious organizations, they're protected a 501c3. So they're not going to go against any policies that the government is implementing, even if it goes against their religion. You see, in Detroit, you have all these organizations, but they can't come together and do anything for the community of substance because of ego, because of doctrine, and some of the most unsound doctrines known to the modern world. People believe in everything and are divided by these ridiculous belief systems that don't give you enough sense to protect your women and children and to protect your communities. So every Sunday, it's a dress up. Every Easter, it's a dress up. It's a fashion show. While the souls and the spirit of the children has become on demon time. And you may ask, how did they get on demon time? Let me show you where they live in this democratic ran city. Let me show you what the community really looks like.
Is
Now, let
now
me let you
trying to
finish
do
this.
something about the incident in hopes of never having to deal with it again.
We're already having conversations with community leaders, with the police, with our CVI friends, with other residents about how we're going to come together to help fight this.
Community leaders already working on doing.
This is every year they say the same things. We're coming together with community leaders. What community leaders is he talking about? Let's put a name on it. Who do we blame? Who do we go to? What community leaders? Tell me. I'm here in Detroit. Tell me what community leader we can go to that has an answer to this violence in this impoverished community. When you go to the community leaders, guess what they're gonna have on? They're gonna have on a suit. They driving nice cars. They got on alligator shoes. And they kicking the same spiel of Reverend Ike and those that came before them that misled the people. These false prophets don't want to change anything that's going to upset the balance of the collection plate and how they get their money. This is liberalism. This is the Democrats' ideal of democracy that they push down the throat of a people who was once conservative. Let me show you something. UAW shirt, United Auto Workers in Detroit. The staple that uplifted Black Americans in the city of Detroit. The UAW was on strike for better wages and better benefits last year. The Teamsters sided with the UAW workers and said, well, we're not going to deliver the parts. We're not going to cross y'all picking line until y'all get the better wages that y'all asking for. And they did, because they knew places like Chrysler and Ford and GM was using FMLA benefits to harass and fire employees that been there 20 years plus to cheat them out of their pensions. You know, I know people, they worked at these places 20 and 30 years and they fire them over FMLA. You was late or you missed work. It seemed like if somebody worked for you for 20 years straight, that they could at some point miss a few days, but that's not how that go, because the UAW has succumbed to liberalism and democracy. The UAW leaders sided with Biden and the corporations against their workers, knowing that China was building car plants right across the border in Mexico to compete with the workers in the city. And at the same time, they opening the borders for cheap labor. Not to mention that they went against the Teamsters who had been supporting them the whole time. See, this is how the Democrats do. The Democrats feed off the misery and suffering of the communities that they claim to represent. And then you got the older people, they say vote blue, vote blue no matter who. Because they've bought into this liberalism and this debauchery and this inclusion, this DEI that's destroying the country. These is facts. All you got to do is look at it. Now, let's finish this. Let's finish this clip. I got another clip I want to show you.
Doing just that with a peace walk taking place in the area.
This is what we want to create, an atmosphere where we as a community are in control of our neighborhood.
Unfortunately, it's going to be traumatizing for the people who either saw the shooting playing out or the aftermath of so many young people getting hurt.
At the end of the day, it's kids. It's kids. Ain't even lived a life yet. And injured and dying. Right up the street. Right up the street. And the bullets could have came this way. Me and my wife was having a good time. We could have been victims. It's sad. It's sad. It's horribly sad.
Now we are expecting an update from police tomorrow at some point right here at DPD headquarters. We are going to stream the entire thing on Local 4 Plus. In the meantime, we are reporting live tonight. Victor Williams, Local 4.
Michigan.
Let me show you what the inner city looks like. Let me show you what the inside of Highland Park and the parts of Detroit that they don't show you on the news looks like. Let me show you the environment that these children are growing up in. Most of them. Look at this. Look at this community with a Democratic mayor and a Democratic governor and Democratic officials, churches, mosques, and temples, religious leaders, community leaders, you name it. But look how the community looks. I used to work at Wayne County Community College. I worked there for about 5 years in the financial aid office. I helped a lot of people in the city of Detroit get their degrees and get in school. And when I went to Wayne County Community College, did pretty good there, and I ended up going to Wayne State University. I took a class called Urban Studies. I thought it was going to be something totally different. I thought it was going to be about community activism. I don't know what I thought because it was a new class. But what it was a hybrid class that was a mix between political science and social science. And the class was full of Arabs, Indians, and foreigners, and a lot of Chinese people. And what they were actually teaching in this class was how to deal with demographic profiles. Who lives in these communities? How many people over here have diabetes? How many people over here have high school diplomas? How to redline them and marginalize them into one aspect of the city. The professor was a white guy, and clearly he was teaching from a playbook that was false, and he knew it was false. I'll give you an example. This professor was teaching that the first Nation of Islam mosque was in Highland Park, Michigan, in the 1930s and 40s, which was false. He knew it was false. The first Nation of Islam teaching was on the east side, Black Bottom, Paradise Valley, then Linwood, the west side, never in Highland Park. At that time, Highland Park had codicils where no house or property could be sold to a Black American. That was in their codes. That was in their city ordinances. But what he did was try to alter history and rewrite history so that it really displaced the natural inhabitants' accomplishments in Detroit. Like the first mosque was Master Farad Muhammad Elijah Muhammad, started in Paradise Valley, Black Bottom, then moved west, never in Highland Park. But why did he teach that? Why did he teach something that is so historically incorrect at a university in Detroit to a, a classroom full of foreigners, rich foreigners, immigrants who came over here to replace us in jobs like social service office? When you go, then you want to get a bridge card or whatever, you're dealing with all these foreigners and these people who have been educated in a way that contradicts your real history. He talks about how the sharecroppers came and worked in the factories, and it was all misconstrued because he didn't understand that in that classroom I had actually lived that life, where my grandfather and my uncles came from Georgia and Mississippi in the late 40s, no, mid 40s. So this liberalism and this democracy that Black Americans and Black people cleave to is their biggest detriment. And those who claim to be leaders, they know it. You can't tell me that they don't know it. They know enough to get a 501c3 tax exemption. They know enough to get grants. They know enough to organize for their own self benefit. And they know that this right here is what the city really looks like. I'm going to stop there because you get the message. And you may say, well, there's nice parts of Detroit. There's beautiful parts of Detroit. But what I've just showed you is not even the worst. It's like approaching the worst neighborhoods. But there are neighborhoods so devastating that there's one house, one raggedy house, that's surrounded by vacant lots, tall grass, debris, and garbage in this Democratic ran city, in this Democratic ran state, with all this liberalism, with all these organizations, all these religious leaders, all these groups with supreme knowledge, and all these groups with entitlement of being original, and sisters and queens, and kings and queens, and all of this. Let's start there. Didn't no kings or queens get off no slave ship. African kings and queens sold slaves and conquered people to Europeans. That's how you got here if you came from Africa. You want to be tight with the Arabs, but the Arabs created the transatlantic slave trade. They taught the Europeans how to enslave Africans, castrate them, and turn them into eunuchs. But you still cleave to them. You still want to be their friend. Then you say you want reparations, but you don't want it from the Arabs who orchestrated and initiated the slave trade. You don't want reparations from the Africans that sold you to Europeans. You want reparations only in theory, to create a movement to where people come and hear you talk, and then you get donations, but then you sit up and say, we want reparations, but who you going to ask? You think Joe Biden, you think Jim Crow Joe in the Democratic Party going to give you reparations? I just showed you what they did to your communities, how they destroyed the nuclear family. Why would they repair something that they broke on purpose? So we know that's a hustle, just like Pan-Africanism. Look up the history of Liberia and Samuel K. Doe and what they did, what Samuel K. Doe did to the Americans that repatriated back to Africa. Executed them all, their kids, extensions of their family, everything. When will we organize intelligently for the sake of God and country? Think about it. And go into your history level lessons, and you could dispute it, you could even disagree with me. But it's obvious when you see the devastation and the destruction that what you've been doing is not working. So the definition of insanity is to continue to do the same thing, hoping for a different response. Support Detroit's Black Thought and Action Collective. It's a nonprofit of Detroit, and we attempt to bring the mentality and the intelligentsia that it takes to revitalize a once thriving city and community. We ain't gonna be able to do it through religion because people have turned that into cliques, fashion shows. You can look at Kirk Franklin at the BET Awards, TD Jakes, and you can look at all of them, and you can see why the church ain't getting it done, and the temples and the mosques ain't getting it done. Those are groups of elitists imitating their masters. Some are imitating their Christian masters. Some are imitating their Arab masters. That's why they can't wrap their minds around country first. I've had them get into my comments and say that I think like a slave. Impossible for me to fathom being a slave. Because I've said before, my parents couldn't tell me what to do. I didn't obey the law. Teachers, parole boards. Nobody has ever been able to tell me what to do. I've always been a free thinker. And that makes me an outcast and a loner. But I'm okay with that too. But we got to tell the truth about what's going on in our communities, especially when we see the level of violence that we see. So I'm going to sign out on this podcast out of Detroit. Detroit's HPTV. Like, share, and subscribe. Keep your head on a swivel. Salute to all patriots too. Support the nonprofit. Peace. Like, share, and subscribe.